A quiet evening in a glass penthouse overlooking San Francisco Bay turns violent when a millionaire's mistress walks in uninvited, rips the belt from her waist, and lashes it across the face of a pregnant woman who can barely stand. The man who swore to protect her watches in silence, his hands in his pockets, as the woman he once called his wife collapses to the marble floor. But what starts as humiliation in that golden-lit room will ignite a storm of revenge, evidence, and justice that no amount of money can silence. Stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about power and love. Tell us what time you're listening and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Under the late afternoon light of San Francisco, the glass penthouse shimmered like a dream suspended above the bay. Every wall reflected gold. Every surface gleamed as if perfection could be polished into existence. Emma Caldwell moved slowly through the open living room, one hand resting on her rounded belly, the other stirring a pot of simmering soup on the marble counter. The scent of rosemary and butter filled the air, warm and homely against the sterile beauty of the $8 million view. She smiled faintly, imagining Ethan walking through the door, pretending the world outside didn't exist, just for tonight. For 5 months, she had believed this calm meant safety. The soft hum of the elevator interrupted the silence. Emma checked the clock. Ethan was early. She adjusted the ribbon of her light blue dress and turned toward the entryway with relief. The doors opened, but it wasn't Ethan alone. A tall woman stepped in first, her heels clicking like warning shots on the marble floor. Sabrina Cruz. Emma's smile froze, the ladle trembling in her hand. Sabrina's red dress gleamed under the ceiling lights, her perfume cutting through the air like alcohol on an open wound. Ethan followed behind, his phone still in his hand, his face unreadable. "I didn't know we had company," Emma said softly, trying to sound calm. "She's helping me with a project," Ethan replied, not meeting her eyes. "You should be polite." Polite. The word burned in her throat. Sabrina's lips curved into a smirk as she walked farther in, tracing a manicured finger along the counter. "I heard you make a wonderful hostess, Emma," she said, her tone dripping with sugar and venom. Emma's pulse quickened. She could feel her baby move, a gentle flutter that reminded her to breathe. "This isn't the time or place," she whispered to Ethan, but he was already pouring himself a drink, pretending nothing was wrong. The first insult came like a slap without sound. Sabrina laughed about the penthouse decor, about Emma's suburban taste, about the fact that she'd given up her career to be the wife of a genius. Ethan said nothing. He stood near the window, phone in one hand, glass in the other, watching the bay as if he were above all of it. "Maybe you should leave," Emma said finally, her voice shaking but firm. Sabrina's laughter echoed off the glass walls. "Or what? You'll call your husband? Oh wait, he's right here." She turned toward Ethan with mock affection. "Do you hear her telling me what to do?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Enough, both of you." But Sabrina wasn't finished. She reached for the black leather belt wrapped around her waist, slid it free with a sharp hiss, and held it loosely in her hand. The air shifted, heavy and electric. Emma's breath caught. "Don't you dare!" "Ugh." Sabrina's eyes glinted with cruelty. "You think your baby makes you untouchable?" The belt cracked through the air before Emma could move. Pain tore across her arm, the sting instant, hot, and blinding. She stumbled backward, colliding with the counter. The pot tipped, spilling scalding liquid across the floor. Ethan stepped forward, but not to help. "Stop being dramatic," he muttered. "You provoked her." Emma stared at him, disbelief widening her eyes. "She hit me, Ethan! I'm bleeding!" You're hysterical," he said flatly. "You've been unstable for weeks. Sabrina, go wait in the car." Sabrina didn't move. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice a whisper only Emma could hear. "He doesn't love you anymore. He hasn't for a long time. Even this baby can't change that." Another strike landed, not with the belt this time, but with words that cut deeper. Emma's knees buckled. She fell to the floor, one hand pressed to her stomach, the other smeared with soup and blood. The sound of her own breathing filled her ears, uneven and desperate. "Get up," Ethan ordered, his tone that of a man addressing a stranger. "You're embarrassing yourself." The city beyond the windows glowed orange and silver, cars moving like veins of light through the hills. Inside, the penthouse was silent except for the slow drip of soup from the counter. Emma looked up at Ethan, her tears mixing with the reflection of the skyline on the glass. "How could you let her?" she whispered. Ethan's expression didn't change. "You've made everything impossible. You used to understand my stress. Now all you do is cry." He set his glass down and adjusted his cufflinks as if preparing for another meeting. "Clean this up before it stains the marble." Sabrina brushed past him toward the elevator, her laughter soft and cruel. "Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm sure the baby will look like him. That way you'll always have a reminder." The elevator doors slid shut with a mechanical sigh. Emma stayed on the floor, the taste of salt and metal in her mouth. The baby kicked again, stronger this time, as if demanding that she stay conscious. She pressed her palm against her belly, whispering, "It's okay, little one. I've got you." But her voice cracked on the last word. Ethan crossed the room, his shadow falling over her. For a moment she thought he might help her up. Instead, he picked up his jacket and keys. "I'm going out," he said. "You need to calm down." "Yo, come." "Ethan, please," she murmured. "We need a doctor." He didn't look back. "You need rest, not drama." The door closed behind him, the lock clicking like a final verdict. The penthouse lights dimmed automatically as evening fell. Emma dragged herself toward the nearest chair, her arm throbbing where the belt had struck. A thin line of blood trickled down to her wrist, staining the silk of her dress. She reached for her phone, but the screen was cracked from the fall. The reflection staring back at her was a stranger, pale, trembling, but alive. Outside, the sun sank behind the bridge, casting a streak of fire across the glass walls. The penthouse that once felt like paradise now looked like a cage of light. Emma's gaze fell to the floor where her wedding ring lay, knocked loose in the chaos. The diamond caught the dying sunlight, scattering fragments of gold across the marble. She picked it up slowly, her fingers shaking. For a moment, she thought about putting it back on. Then she closed her hand around it instead, squeezing until her knuckles whitened. Blood from the cut on her arm dripped onto the ring, mixing with the shimmer. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the humiliation, a spark ignited, small, quiet, but unstoppable. She wasn't sure what it meant yet, only that something inside her had changed forever. As the first stars appeared over the bay, Emma sat alone in the vast silence, her body aching, her child still kicking, her mind replaying every second of what had just happened. The sound of the belt, the coldness in Ethan's voice, the laughter of the woman who had struck her, all of it fused into one truth. The life she thought she had was gone. The final shot of the scene would linger on her hand, resting protectively over her stomach. The camera would slowly pan down to the floor, where her ring, slick with blood and tears, glimmered faintly in the fading light, the last fragment of a marriage that had just died. Morning light seeped through the glass walls of the penthouse, painting everything in muted gold. Emma Caldwell sat on the edge of the bed, her arm wrapped in gauze, her eyes hollow from another sleepless night. The apartment was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. Ethan had already left for work, leaving behind a cup of cold coffee and the faint scent of his cologne. The bruise along her shoulder burned when she moved. Every sound, every creak in the house made her flinch. She tried to convince herself the worst was over, that Sabrina's cruelty was a one-time act, but the silence in the penthouse was not peace, it was preparation. When Ethan returned that evening, he acted as if nothing had happened. He kissed her forehead, asked how she was feeling, then spent the rest of dinner scrolling through his phone. His calmness felt rehearsed, his affection mechanical. The next day, he arranged for her to see Dr. Miller, their private obstetrician. The visit seemed ordinary until Emma noticed the doctor's tone shifting. He spoke gently, too gently, asking if she had been feeling anxious or paranoid. When she asked what he meant, he avoided her eyes. Later that night, she overheard Ethan on the phone in the study, saying, "She's been unstable lately. Hormonal changes. Please make a note in her chart." Her pulse quickened. He was creating a paper trail, one that would make her look unfit. Over the following week, her world began to shrink. Ethan canceled her credit cards, claiming it was temporary while the accounts were being reorganized. He hired a private chef and a driver, saying she shouldn't exert herself. Her friends stopped visiting. When she called, they were polite but distant. One of them, Caroline, finally said in a hushed voice, "Ethan told us you've been under a lot of stress. Maybe it's better if you rest." The word rest began to sound like a cage. Sabrina's presence, though unseen, seeped into every corner of Emma's life. Late at night, Emma's phone would buzz with messages from an unknown number. At first, they were vague. "He's happier now. You should let go." Then they turned cruel. "He's mine now. Even your baby knows it." Attached photos followed, Ethan and Sabrina at a restaurant, laughing, his hand on her thigh. Emma deleted them, but the images clung to her mind like smoke. By the end of the second week, Emma barely recognized her reflection. The woman who once led meetings, negotiated contracts, and spoke her mind now moved like a ghost through her own home. Every step felt monitored, every call felt recorded. When she asked Ethan about the credit cards, he sighed. "You're becoming paranoid, Emma. This isn't healthy. People are starting to notice." His tone was patient, patronizing, the way someone speaks to a child. She felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to nod. "You're right," she said quietly, though inside she was screaming. At her next appointment, Dr. Miller smiled kindly but spoke carefully, asking if she had been having episodes. He mentioned that Ethan had shared concerns about delusions and stress-related memory gaps. She wanted to shout that it was all a lie, but something in the doctor's expression warned her that her words would only confirm the narrative being built around her. When she returned home, she opened the medical folder Ethan kept in his office and found it there. A note dated 3 days earlier. "Patient exhibits anxiety, possible prenatal hallucinations." Her hands shook so violently she could barely close the drawer. That night, while Ethan slept beside her, she lay awake, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. Each inhale sounded like control. Each exhale sounded like ownership. She turned her face toward the ceiling and felt the tears slide into her hair. Somewhere inside, a new thought formed, sharp and quiet. If he wanted to paint her as crazy, she would give him nothing more to use. She would become still, observant, invisible until she found a way to fight back. The next morning, she woke early, dressed, and stood before the mirror. The bruise on her arm had darkened to a deep violet. She reached for her phone and took a picture. Then another. She began a hidden folder labeled "For Lila," the name she had already chosen for her unborn daughter. Every message, every medical report, every bruise would go there. She started keeping a small notebook, writing down dates, times, phrases Ethan used. Unstable, paranoid, hysterical. Each word became evidence. Each day, her fear hardened into something colder. Ethan continued to play his role flawlessly. To outsiders, he was the perfect husband caring for a fragile wife. He organized charity galas, gave interviews about family values, smiled for photographers. The world adored him. Inside the penthouse, Emma ate in silence, watched him perform kindness for the cameras, and counted the seconds until he was gone. She had learned to measure safety in minutes, not hours. One afternoon, Sabrina sent a final message. "You should be grateful. He still lets you stay." That night, Emma deleted every photo of her wedding. Then she took out a small mirror from her vanity and looked at herself. Her cheeks were pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. But something about her gaze had changed. It no longer carried confusion or disbelief. It carried awareness. She remembered the last time she had begged Ethan to listen, the way he looked through her as if she were a problem to solve, not a person to love. That image burned away the last remnants of her denial. She whispered to her reflection, "You're not crazy, you're trapped." The words steadied her heartbeat. Outside, rain began to fall against the glass, streaking down in long, crooked lines. She stood there for a long time, watching the city blur into streaks of gray and silver. Somewhere beneath the noise, she heard her baby's heartbeat in memory, steady and strong. Emma walked toward her desk, opened her notebook, and wrote one line across the page, "Document everything." Then she slipped the phone beside it and took another picture of her arm, the bruise fading but still visible. She didn't cry this time. The night stretched long and silent, the rain tapping like distant footsteps. The apartment's reflective walls showed her from every angle, wounded but unbroken. The final image reveals Emma standing before the mirror, her face pale, yet her eyes brighter than ever. The dim light reflects across them, capturing a truth newly born inside her. The woman who once trembled has vanished, and the survivor within her has begun to rise. The morning felt heavier than usual, as if the air itself had thickened inside the glass walls of the penthouse. Emma sat in the living room, her hands folded over her stomach, staring at the skyline that shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. San Francisco looked beautiful from above, but the view now felt distant and cruel. Every reflection reminded her of what she had become, a woman trapped inside her husband's empire. Her phone lay silent on the table. She had stopped expecting calls. Friends no longer reached out, and her family had learned to speak carefully, afraid of making things worse. She could feel herself fading from the world one quiet hour at a time. When Ethan called her into his office that afternoon, his voice was calm and almost gentle. He rarely used that tone anymore. The office smelled faintly of cedar and leather, every object placed in perfect symmetry. The curtains were half drawn, soft light glinting off a black envelope on his desk. He gestured for her to sit. "Emma," he began, "I think it's time we make things easier for both of us." His tone was deliberate, each word controlled. He pushed the envelope toward her. Inside was a typed agreement and a check for $500,000. Emma looked down at the papers, reading the first line slowly. It wasn't a divorce decree. It was a confidentiality agreement. She felt her stomach turn as she realized what it meant. "You want me to sign this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "so you can keep everything quiet." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her with detached patience. "I want peace," he said. "You're exhausted, and this fighting isn't good for the baby. If you sign, you'll have financial security, and I'll handle everything else." Her fingers brushed against the glossy surface of the check, $500,000. To him, it was nothing. To her, it was the price of erasing herself. "You're buying my silence," she murmured. "I'm offering you a way out," he corrected, his voice low and firm. "If you don't want to end this gracefully, then you're forcing me to protect my reputation another way." Emma looked up, her pulse quickening. "What does that mean?" Ethan's expression hardened. "It means," he said slowly, "if you continue acting unstable, if you keep accusing me of things that never happened, people will start to wonder. You've already been marked as emotionally volatile in your medical file. I didn't want it to come to this, but I will use what I have to ensure my company and my child are safe." Her breath caught. "You falsified that report," she said, disbelief breaking into anger. "You told the doctor I was hallucinating." He didn't deny it. He just smiled slightly, the kind of smile that came from a man who believed he could shape reality to his will. "Sometimes perception is everything, and right now, everyone perceives you as fragile. Don't make that perception permanent." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "You would destroy me just to look clean." Ethan stood, walking around the desk to stand behind her. His voice dropped to a whisper near her ear. "No one destroys anyone, Emma. People destroy themselves. I'm just helping you see what's best." She turned slowly to face him, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "You're not helping me. You're burying me." He sighed, irritated that she wasn't reacting with fear this time. "Sign it. Don't make this harder than it has to be." Emma stared at the paper again, then at the check. The ink shimmered faintly under the light, as if daring her to trade her dignity for safety. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, without a word, she tore the check in half. The sound was small but sharp, like glass cracking. Ethan froze. His jaw tightened, and the calm mask slipped from his face. "You just made a very bad decision," he said. "No," she replied softly. "I've finally made one that's mine." His voice rose, sharp and cold. "Do you think you can survive without me? You don't even have access to your accounts anymore. You have nothing." She met his gaze, her voice trembling but clear. "Then I'll start with nothing." He stared at her for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to laugh or shout. Instead, he turned toward his computer, typing quickly. "Fine. You want independence? You have it." A few seconds later, he hit enter. "Your cards are canceled. Your phone plan is terminated. You'll learn how small the world feels when no one believes you." Emma stood there, stunned but silent. She watched him pour himself another drink, his reflection fractured in the glass. He didn't look at her again. "Close the door on your way out," he said. She left the office without a word. The penthouse was dim, the sunset reflecting red across the windows. The city's lights began to flicker on, one by one, distant and unreachable. Emma walked to the nursery that had once made her smile. Tiny clothes hung neatly on the rack, untouched. She ran her hand over a small blue blanket and felt tears sting her eyes. The baby moved, a faint reminder that life still existed inside her even when everything else felt dead. That night, she sat by the window, listening to the sound of the wind rising over the bay. The city pulsed far below, indifferent to her pain. She thought about her father, the man who had taught her to never back down from injustice. She could still hear his voice telling her, "Don't let them decide who you are." By midnight, she had made up her mind. She slipped on her coat, tucked her phone, still functional for now, into her pocket, and left the apartment. The elevator ride felt endless, the mirrored walls reflecting her pale face and swollen eyes. When she stepped into the street, the cold air cut through her like ice. She walked until she reached the quiet cemetery at the edge of Golden Gate Park. The night smelled of rain and pine. She stopped in front of her father's grave, tracing the engraved letters with her fingertips. "You'd tell me to fight," she whispered. "You'd tell me to stand tall, even if no one believes me." Her voice broke. "I'm scared, Dad, but I can't be silent anymore." Lightning flickered over the bay, followed by the low rumble of thunder. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, her body felt still, her mind steady. When the rain began to fall, she didn't move. Water ran down her hair, soaking her coat, but she didn't care. She pressed her palm over her stomach, feeling her baby's faint kick, a promise that she was not alone. "I won't be quiet," she whispered again, louder this time. The words didn't tremble, they carried weight. The scene ends with Emma standing in the rain before her father's grave, her hair plastered to her face, her eyes no longer filled with fear but with calm determination. The woman who had once begged for mercy now looked ready to fight for her life, her child, and the truth itself. The rain had stopped by dawn, leaving a pale silver mist over the bay. Emma Caldwell stood by the window, her reflection ghost-like against the glass. The night before had stripped away the last layer of fear that kept her quiet. Her clothes were still damp from the rain, her hair clinging to her neck, but her heartbeat felt steady for the first time in weeks. The penthouse was silent. Ethan was gone, attending meetings that filled the newspapers but never his conscience. She turned away from the view and picked up the phone. This time, she wasn't calling for help. She was calling for proof. By noon, she was sitting in a small cafe on the quieter side of the city, far from the shimmering towers of the financial district. Across the table sat Noah Bennett, a man in his late 50s with tired eyes and hands that carried the calm precision of someone who had once handled both secrets and danger. His gray hair was trimmed short, his voice low but firm. He listened as Emma told him everything. The belt, the gaslighting, the forged medical notes, the threats, the money. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, his expression didn't show pity. It showed understanding. "I've seen this before," Noah said finally, folding his hands. "Men like him think control makes them untouchable. But control leaves footprints. You said he forged your name?" Emma nodded. "On medical files, yes, maybe more." Noah pulled out a worn notebook. "Then we'll start there." He explained his background in quiet detail. 20 years in federal investigations, dozens of corporate fraud cases, a wife who had been beaten by a police officer and didn't survive long enough for justice. He had retired soon after, disgusted by how easily powerful men rewrote the truth. When he looked at Emma, his voice softened slightly. "You're not just dealing with abuse, you're dealing with organized theft. If he's as rich as you say, he's hiding something bigger." For the first time, Emma felt seen. She reached for her cup of tea, her fingers trembling slightly. "Can you prove it?" "If it's there," he said, "I'll find it. But you need to understand what this means. Once we start, there's no turning back." Emma thought of her father's grave, the rain soaking her coat, the promise she had made. "I don't want to turn back," she said quietly. "I want the truth." That afternoon, Noah began the search. He worked from a small office filled with dusty files and humming computers. Emma joined him in silence, scanning documents, signing into old email accounts, piecing together fragments of Ethan's empire. The more they looked, the more patterns appeared. transfers between companies with unfamiliar names, payments approved with Emma's digital signature, financial statements that didn't align with reality. Noah leaned forward, pointing at the screen. Here, Caldwell Ventures, LLC, registered offshore. But look who authorized it. Emma read the name, Emma Caldwell. Her own handwriting replicated perfectly in digital ink. Her stomach twisted. "That's not me," she whispered. "It's a forgery," Noah said. "A clean one. He used your identity to move money, probably millions." She stared at the files, the shock freezing her for a moment. "So if this comes out, it looks like I'm the one stealing." Noah nodded slowly. "Exactly. He's building an escape route. If anyone catches on, it all falls on you." The realization hit like cold water. All the manipulation, all the rumors about her instability, it wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. Ethan was painting her as both crazy and corrupt, preparing the world to blame her if everything collapsed. Emma sat back, gripping the edge of the chair. "He's planning to ruin me completely." Noah's voice was steady. "Then we ruin his plan first." For the next few days, they worked in secret. Emma traveled under an alias, visiting small offices and storage units linked to Ethan's companies. Noah taught her how to store files on encrypted drives, how to back them up in cloud accounts he had built years ago. She hid a USB stick inside the lining of her purse and another inside a small silver locket she wore around her neck. Every document, every screenshot, every signature became a weapon. At night, when she returned to the penthouse, she pretended everything was normal. Ethan still smiled, still asked about her doctor's visits, still touched her shoulder with practiced tenderness. She responded with nods and short answers, hiding the trembling in her hands. Each time he left the room, she checked her phone, transferring another file to Noah. It was a game of patience. A single mistake could destroy everything. One evening, Ethan mentioned a new project launching in Singapore. "We'll need your signature on a few documents," he said casually. "Just routine." His eyes watched her too closely. Emma smiled faintly and agreed. When he handed her the tablet, she recognized the document layout immediately, the same formatting Noah had shown her from the offshore accounts. She signed with her initials, but not before turning on the recording app on her phone hidden under the table. Her voice was calm. "So these are for the Singapore transfer?" Ethan nodded. "Good. I'll keep a copy." When he left for a meeting, she sent the recording to Noah. His reply came 10 minutes later. "You just gave us what we needed." Emma exhaled shakily, closing her eyes. For the first time, victory didn't feel impossible. But power never sleeps. Late that week, as she drove home from Noah's office, she noticed a car in her rearview mirror. It had followed her for several blocks. Dark, tinted windows, no license plate visible. Her grip on the steering wheel tightened. She turned right onto a quieter street. The car followed. Her heart began to race. She took another turn, pretending to head toward a shopping district. The car stayed behind her. She pulled into her building's parking garage, pretending not to notice. The air was cool and smelled faintly of rain and oil. Her heels clicked softly on the concrete as she crossed toward the elevator. Then she saw it. A black sedan idled near the exit ramp, its headlights still on. Through the windshield, a figure sat motionless. Emma squinted against the glare. When the lights dimmed for a moment, she saw the face clearly. Sabrina Cruz. Sabrina's lips curved into a faint smile. She didn't move, didn't roll down the window, just watched. The message was clear. She knew. Emma froze, the sound of her heartbeat thundering in her ears. For a long second, neither woman moved. Then the sedan's engine roared softly, and the car backed away, disappearing into the rain-darkened street. Emma stood there, her reflection trembling in the wet concrete. Every instinct told her to run, but she didn't. She lifted her chin slightly, breathing in the cold night air. Fear would not rule her again. The final image shows Emma standing alone under the harsh white light of the parking garage, rainwater pooling around her shoes. Her coat clings to her body, her expression calm, unyielding. Somewhere beyond the shadows, danger watches her, but she no longer hides. The battle for her truth has begun. The days after the discovery blurred together into one long stretch of exhaustion. Emma moved through the penthouse like a shadow, surviving on adrenaline and fear. She met with Noah in secret, exchanging encrypted files, whispering details about accounts and forged signatures. Every hour felt like a countdown. She barely slept. Her meals went untouched. Her hands trembled whenever she heard footsteps in the hallway. Ethan's presence filled every corner of her mind, even in his absence. Noah had warned her that men like Ethan always sensed when control began to slip. She was living proof of that. By the end of the week, her body began to betray her. She woke in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, her heart pounding as if she had been running. When she tried to stand, her knees buckled, the walls seemed to tilt around her. She pressed a hand to her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "We're okay, just breathe." But the next wave of pain came sharper, low and deep. She gasped, clutching the counter to steady herself. The contraction lingered, followed by another. The sound of glass shattering echoed through the kitchen as the cup fell from her hand. She tried to call Noah, but her vision blurred. The driver found her collapsed near the door and rushed her to the hospital. Sirens filled the streets as the ambulance sped through traffic. The lights of the city streaked by in a haze of red and white. The paramedic's voice was calm but urgent. "She's 30 weeks. Preterm labor possible." Emma wanted to respond, but her lips would not move. The pain ebbed and surged like a tide. Then everything went dark. When she opened her eyes, the room was white and quiet, except for the rhythmic beep of the monitor beside her. She was at Street Helena Medical Center, a hospital she had only seen once before during charity events. The irony struck her first. Ethan had donated millions to this place, his name engraved on the marble wall in the lobby. Now she was lying here, weak and alone, surrounded by the empire he had built. The door opened with a soft click. Ethan entered, holding a bouquet of white roses and a cup of coffee, as if he had just come from a casual meeting. His face carried the calm perfection of a man used to public sympathy. "You scared me," he said gently, pulling up a chair. "You need to take better care of yourself. Stress like this isn't good for the baby." Emma turned her face toward the window. Her voice was hoarse. "You shouldn't be here." He chuckled softly. "Emma, I'm your husband. Of course I should be here. Everyone is worried about you." Everyone. That word made her chest tighten. He always used it when he wanted her to feel isolated. She didn't answer. He reached out, brushing her arm where the IV was taped. "The doctors say you've been anxious, seeing things that aren't there. It happens sometimes. Hormones, exhaustion, you need rest." End of day. She looked at him, her expression blank. "You told them that, didn't you?" "I told them what they needed to know." His tone was kind, almost paternal. "I'm protecting you." She wanted to scream, but her body wouldn't move. He smiled as if reading her thoughts. "I've already spoken to the press. They're waiting outside. I told them you were strong, just overworked. People love you, Emma. Don't ruin that image." Before she could reply, his phone buzzed. He stepped aside to answer, voice dropping low. "She's stable. Move the rest tonight. Don't leave a trace." He turned his back to her, glancing at the hallway before ending the call. When he returned to her bedside, his tone was light again. "I'll be nearby if you need anything." After he left, Emma stared at the ceiling, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips, the echo of panic mixing with anger. She wanted to believe she was safe here, but she knew better. Ethan owned this place. Every nurse, every administrator, every system was under his control. A few hours later, a knock came at the door. Emma thought it was another nurse. When she looked up, she froze. Sabrina Cruz stood in the doorway, dressed in a cream coat, her hair perfectly styled. She carried a bouquet of white lilies, the same kind used in funerals. "What are you doing here?" Emma whispered. Sabrina smiled sweetly. "Ethan asked me to check on you. He said you've been fragile." Emma's hands tightened around the blanket. "Get out!" Sabrina moved closer, setting the flowers at the foot of the bed. "You look tired. He's already planning life without you. You know that, right?" Emma's breath hitched. "You're lying." "Am I?" Sabrina tilted her head. "He said you're unwell, that you imagine things. By next week, no one will question him when he says you needed long-term care. It's all written down." Blank. Before Emma could respond, the door opened again. A nurse stepped inside. "Everything all right here?" Sabrina smiled at the nurse, the perfect picture of politeness. "Just a short visit between family." She leaned close to Emma's ear and whispered, "He said to tell you goodbye." Then she turned and left. The nurse looked uncertain. "Do you want me to call your husband, Mrs. Caldwell?" Emma shook her head. No, please close the door. La. When she was alone again, she reached for the call button, but her finger hovered in the air. If she told them what happened, Ethan would twist it into another symptom. Paranoia. Delusion. Every accusation would become proof of her instability. She let her hand fall. Outside, the city glowed through the rain, distant and unreachable. She remembered Noah's warning. He'll make truth sound like madness. The monitor beside her beeped steadily, the sound blending with her heartbeat. She turned her head and saw the lilies glowing faintly under the cold white light. They smelled of death. An hour later, Ethan returned. "You had a visitor?" he asked, feigning concern. "I told you not to let her near me." He sighed as if disappointed. "You're imagining things again." Sabrina just wanted to apologize. He adjusted her blanket with deliberate care. "Try to rest, Emma. The doctors mentioned observation if you don't improve. Just for your safety." "No." She turned away, eyes fixed on the dark window. "Please leave." He lingered for a moment, then nodded. "I'll check on you in the morning." When the door finally closed, Emma let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The monitor continued its rhythm, each beat like a pulse of determination. She reached down and placed her hand over her stomach. The baby kicked once, steady and strong. The light from the hallway spilled into the room, outlining her pale face and weary eyes. The fear that had once consumed her now sat quietly beside resolve. She wasn't safe, but she was awake. She knew what she had to do. The scene ends with Emma lying still in the dim hospital room, her hand resting protectively on her belly, her eyes open and unblinking. The faint hum of machines fills the silence, and the steady heartbeat of her unborn child becomes the only sound of hope left in the night. The morning Emma returned home from the hospital. The air inside the penthouse felt thinner, as if something vital had been pulled away. The glass walls that once shimmered with light now reflected only emptiness. She moved carefully through the rooms, each step measured, her body still fragile but her mind alert. Ethan had refused to let her stay in the hospital's recovery suite, insisting that she come home, saying she would heal faster surrounded by familiar things. He had smiled when he said it, but the smile never reached his eyes. It was not concern, it was control. When he left for work that afternoon, Emma sat in the quiet, her hands resting over her stomach. The faint hum of the air conditioner filled the space where her heartbeat should have been. She picked up the phone and called Noah. Her voice was calm, steady. "He thinks I'm weak," she said. "Then let him think that," Noah replied. His tone carried the weight of someone who understood danger. "If he believes you're harmless, he won't see what's coming. Are you ready to move forward?" "Yes," she answered. "I'm done being afraid." That evening, while Ethan was at a corporate dinner, Noah arrived at the penthouse disguised as a maintenance worker. He carried a small toolbox and moved with quiet precision. Emma let him in through the service elevator. They spoke little. Words were unnecessary now. He began installing the devices in silence. 2 small cameras hidden within the air vents, and 1 recording unit beneath the nightstand in the bedroom. When she asked how long they would last, he replied softly, "Long enough to hear the truth." After he left, the house looked unchanged, but Emma knew it was alive in a new way. Every lie, every whisper, every word would now have a witness. The next morning, she resumed her role as the obedient wife. She poured Ethan's coffee, asked about his meetings, smiled at the right moments. He seemed pleased by her submission, mistaking stillness for surrender. As soon as he stepped into his office, she sat in the living room with her book open, pretending to read while the hidden cameras watched everything. Hours later, Noah sent her a message. "We're getting something. Don't react." Her pulse quickened. She turned another page and waited. Through the tiny microphone, Ethan's voice came first, sharp and methodical. Then another voice joined him, Sabrina. Their words were faint but clear. "She's calm again," Sabrina said. "Maybe too calm." Ethan's reply was almost casual. "It doesn't matter. In a few weeks, it will all be over. One accident, a small dose, maybe something from the doctor, will make it look natural." Emma's hands froze on the book. The air in her chest seemed to vanish. Noah was recording every word. Later that night, she met him in his small office. The walls were lined with old case files, and a single lamp cast a soft yellow glow over the desk. Noah played the recording again, the sound of Ethan's voice filling the room. "She won't live to see the baby born." Emma's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Her voice was barely audible. "He's planning to kill me!" Noah looked at her with quiet certainty. "Yes, but now we have him. This is enough to start building the case. We just need to gather more. Once we show it to the authorities, he can't escape." Emma stared at the laptop screen. Proof felt heavier than she imagined. She thought of the danger it carried. If he finds out, he'll destroy everything. "Then we make sure he doesn't," Noah said. "Act normal. Keep collecting. You know what's at stake." Over the next few days, Emma followed his advice. She smiled when Ethan spoke to her. She thanked him for flowers she hadn't asked for. At night, she sat in her room, uploading files to a hidden drive. Each click felt like a small act of defiance. She began labeling them carefully. Financial transfers, Sabrina calls, recorded confession. The folder grew larger each night, but the calm could not last. Sabrina started to notice changes. During one visit, she studied Emma with narrowed eyes. "You're quiet," she said. "Different. What are you hiding?" Emma met her gaze evenly. "Nothing. I'm just tired." Sabrina's smile was thin. "Maybe you should rest more. You don't look well." After she left, Emma sat by the window, feeling the walls of the penthouse tighten around her. She knew Sabrina was suspicious. The next message from Noah confirmed it. "She's watching you. Don't do anything for a few days." So Emma waited. The waiting was the hardest part. Every night, she lay beside Ethan, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, wondering how someone could sleep so peacefully with murder on his mind. She would wake before dawn, move quietly to his office, and copy one more file. The cameras kept capturing what he never imagined anyone could see: money transfers, coded messages, quiet conversations with Sabrina. One night, while transferring a new batch of audio files, she found a message labeled "Cruise Call, 11:47 p.m. Her hand shook as she clicked play. Ethan's voice came through first, cold and precise. "Everything is ready. She signs the insurance transfer tomorrow." After that, no more delays. Sabrina's voice followed, light but sharp. "You always did prefer simpler solutions." Emma closed the file and sent it to Noah. Her reflection in the dark screen looked unfamiliar. Stronger, older, harder. She felt her baby move, a small reminder of what she was fighting for. When Ethan returned home later that night, she was already in bed, pretending to sleep. He leaned down, brushing her hair from her forehead. "You look peaceful," he murmured. She didn't answer. Her mind was elsewhere, focused on the files now secured far beyond his reach. Hours passed before she opened her eyes again. The city outside was still and gray, the faintest light creeping through the blind. She sat up slowly, reached for the laptop, and pressed play on the latest recording. Ethan's voice filled the silence once more. The same words that had haunted her. "She won't live to see the baby born." Emma listened without flinching this time. The sound no longer frightened her. It fueled her. She saved the file under a new name and began creating another folder. The glow of the screen lit her face, soft but unwavering, as she typed one word across the title bar: "Justice." The hum of the computer blended with the distant whisper of morning. Everything around her was quiet, but inside her, something was already moving forward. The city outside was calm, wrapped in the stillness that came before a storm. Inside Noah's office, the air felt heavier than usual, thick with the quiet tension of a plan about to be set in motion. Emma sat across from him, her hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the evidence spread across the table. Every file, every recording, every photograph told the same story. The man who had vowed to protect her had plotted her death. She had replayed his words so many times they no longer stung, only echoed. Now, there was nothing left to feel but focus. Noah leaned forward, his voice steady but low. "They're ready. The FBI will move when we give the signal. But we need him to say it again, in person, and we need him on camera." Emma's voice barely rose above a whisper. "He won't come if he suspects anything." "That's why he won't suspect," Noah said. "You're going to invite him back into the cage he built." "Aye." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Emma nodded. "He thinks I'm broken. Let him see how broken I can pretend to be." The next day, she called Ethan. Her tone was soft, measured, almost weary. "I don't want to fight anymore," she said. "Let's talk about ending this peacefully." You can bring Sabrina if you want. I just want closure." Ethan paused before answering. His voice carried both curiosity and caution. "You mean it?" "Yes," she said. "I'm tired, Ethan. I just want it over." "You can." When the call ended, she sat for a long time in silence, her reflection faint in the glass window behind her. Her heart beat faster than she wanted it to, but the fear was no longer consuming her. It had become part of her strength. That evening, Noah and 2 FBI technicians entered the penthouse under the guise of security maintenance. They worked methodically, placing cameras behind air vents, within picture frames, and inside the chandelier that hung over the dining table. Every angle, every light reflection, every corner of the room would be recorded. Noah checked the connections one last time. "Once they're here, you don't have to say much. Let him talk. He always does." Emma nodded, her voice firm. "He likes to brag. That will be his mistake." By nightfall, the penthouse had transformed from a prison into a stage. The soft, golden lights glowed over the polished marble floors. 2 glasses of red wine stood on the table, beside a folder filled with blank papers. Everything looked disarmingly normal. Outside, unmarked vehicles waited silently on the nearby street. At exactly 8 o'clock, the elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped out first. Sharp suit, easy confidence. Sabrina followed, her smile taunting, her perfume heavy in the air. "You look better?" Ethan said casually, glancing around. "I wasn't sure you'd actually go through with this." "No." Emma stood near the window, her hands folded loosely in front of her. "I said I wanted peace. I meant it." Sabrina laughed, her tone brittle. "Peace, darling, isn't really your strong suit, is it?" Ethan gestured toward the table. "Let's get this over with. What exactly are you offering?" Emma gestured to the folder. "I drafted an agreement. I'll give up any claim to the company, the property, all of it. I just want you to stop." Ethan arched an eyebrow. "Stop what, Emma?" She met his eyes. "Lying, pretending, acting like you ever intended to let me live through this." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made her blood run cold. "You always were dramatic." Sabrina poured herself a glass of wine and leaned against the counter. "He's offering you freedom, sweetheart. You should take it while you still can." The clock on the wall ticked softly. Emma walked to the table and sat down. "Let's talk about what happens after the baby is born." "Yen," Ethan chuckled. "You're still talking as if that's going to happen." "Isn't it?" she asked quietly. He looked at her for a long moment, then shrugged. "She won't make it that far. You knew that the day you signed your first paper with my name on it." The words hung in the air like static. Somewhere, a camera light blinked once. Sabrina's laughter broke the silence. "You never could help yourself," she said to him, sipping her wine. He smirked. "Why should I? She can't touch me." "No one can." The sound of the elevator came again, this time sharper, heavier. The doors slid open and voices shouted in unison. "Federal Bureau of Investigation! Step away from the table!" The room erupted in chaos. Ethan froze, his glass falling and shattering against the marble. Sabrina dropped her wine, the liquid spreading in a crimson trail across the floor. Agents swarmed in from every direction, their movements fast, efficient, practiced. Ethan's shock melted into rage. "This is a mistake. Do you know who I am?" One of the agents stepped forward, voice firm. "We do. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted murder, and obstruction of justice." Ethan's face drained of color. He turned toward Emma, disbelief etched into every line. "You did this," he said quietly. She stood where she was, calm and unmoving. "You did this to yourself. You." Sabrina began shouting, denying everything, but the cameras had already captured her voice, her face, her words. The agents led them both away in handcuffs, their protests fading into the corridor. When the room finally fell silent, Emma exhaled slowly. The smell of spilled wine and perfume lingered in the air. She walked to the table, staring at the folder that had never been signed. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of release. Noah entered moments later, the faint crackle of a radio still in his ear. "It's over," he said softly. Emma turned toward the window. The city lights reflected against the glass, streaks of blue and red flickering from the police cars below. "No," she whispered. "It's only beginning." The words slipped into the quiet like a promise. She stood for a long time, watching the reflections dance across the marble floor, her face calm, her heartbeat steady. Outside, The sirens faded into the distance. And inside, the silence felt different now. It was not fear anymore. It was freedom waiting to take its shape. The headlines spread across every screen in the city before the sun had even risen. Millionaire tech CEO arrested in murder plot against pregnant wife. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse. News anchors repeated her name. And the world that once ignored Emma Caldwell could no longer look away. From her small apartment near the marina, she watched the chaos unfold on television, her reflection faint in the glass. Every word, every image, carried the weight of what she had survived. The man who once decided what she wore, where she went, and what she could say was now a defendant in a federal trial. When she stepped out of the car that morning, the crowd erupted. Reporters shouted questions that blurred together. "Emma, how do you feel? Did you forgive him? Is it true he tried to kill you?" The flash of cameras turned the courthouse steps into a field of lightning. Her security detail guided her through the noise. Inside, the world grew quieter, the air colder. The marble halls smelled of polish and tension. She clutched the folder that held her testimony. Each page was a chapter she never wanted to write but had lived through. The courtroom was packed. Rows of journalists filled the benches, pens ready, microphones waiting. Ethan sat at the defense table, wearing a gray suit, his hair perfectly combed as if he could still charm his way back to power. Sabrina sat beside him, her expression unreadable, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her calm. The federal prosecutor, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice, arranged her files with precision. Emma sat behind her, heart steady, gaze fixed ahead. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The sound of chairs scraping against the floor echoed like distant thunder. As the proceedings began, the prosecutor stood and spoke with quiet force. "The evidence will show," she said, "that Ethan Caldwell and Sabrina Cruz conspired to end the life of Emma Caldwell, his pregnant wife, to secure control of her assets and erase any trace of financial misconduct." The defense objected immediately, their lawyer tall and theatrical. He painted Emma as fragile, unstable, emotional. "This woman," he said, gesturing toward her, "has suffered trauma. She misinterprets ordinary conversations as threats. Her mind created villains where there were none." Emma sat still, her hands folded on her lap. The words no longer pierced her. They were echoes of a world she had already escaped. Then came the evidence. Noah was the first witness. He testified calmly, explaining how the investigation had begun, how the recordings were collected, and how the FBI verified every file. When the prosecutor asked if any part of the evidence had been altered, he said, "No, ma'am. What you hear and see is exactly what they said." The courtroom listened as the first audio file played. Ethan's voice filled the room, low and deliberate. "She's weak. It will look like an accident." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The second clip followed. Sabrina's laughter cut through the silence like glass. "And the baby?" Ethan's reply came without hesitation. "She won't live to see the baby born." The air grew still. Even the reporters stopped writing. The judge leaned forward, his expression heavy. Emma's breath came slow and even. She pressed her hand against her belly, feeling the faint kick beneath her palm, a reminder that life had chosen to stay. When the video footage began, the courtroom became a theater of truth. The hidden camera from the penthouse played on the large screen, showing Ethan at the table, his arrogance laid bare. "She can't touch me," he said on the recording. "No one can." The prosecutor let the video run for a few moments before pausing it. The silence that followed was heavier than any verdict. During cross-examination, the defense lawyer tried to discredit Emma. "Mrs. Caldwell," he began, "is it possible you edited or encouraged these recordings to portray your husband unfairly?" Emma met his gaze. "No, everything you heard is real. You can twist words, but not the truth." Her calmness silenced him. Even the judge's eyes softened. The prosecutor approached for the final questions. "Mrs. Caldwell, what did you think when you first heard him say those words?" Emma took a breath. "I thought he would win. I thought money and power would always protect him. But then I realized the truth doesn't need power to stand. It only needs to be seen." The prosecutor nodded and stepped back. The jury watched her with quiet respect. The following days were long. Witness after witness testified, from financial experts to hospital staff. Each piece of evidence added another crack to Ethan's defense. Sabrina's lawyer eventually turned against her, arguing she had manipulated Ethan for money. Ethan glared at her across the table, the partnership that had once thrived on secrecy now crumbling under light. On the 7th day of the trial, closing arguments began. The prosecutor spoke plainly, without theatrics. You have heard his voice. You have seen his face. This is not about revenge. This is about accountability. No woman should fear for her life in her own home. No child should be unborn because of greed. The defense repeated the same words they had used from the beginning: stress, confusion, hormones, lies. But the weight of the evidence had already buried those excuses. When the jury left to deliberate, the room emptied into a whispering quiet. Emma sat alone on the wooden bench, her hands clasped together. Noah joined her, his voice low. No matter what happens, you did everything you could. I know, she said, but it has to mean something. Hours passed before the jury returned. The judge called for order. The foreperson stood, holding a sheet of paper. His voice was steady. We, the jury, find the defendants guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted into microphones. Ethan lowered his head, the composure draining from his face. Sabrina wept, clutching her lawyer's arm. The judge's gavel struck the desk 3 times, restoring silence. Emma didn't move. She looked straight ahead, her expression calm. The word guilty echoed through her mind, not as victory, but as closure. She placed a hand over her stomach and closed her eyes for a moment, listening to her heartbeat blending with the imagined rhythm of her child's. Outside, the noise of celebration grew, but inside, she felt only quiet. When she stood to leave, the prosecutor gave her a small nod, and Noah placed a hand on her shoulder. It's over, he said softly. She turned toward the courthouse doors where light poured in through the glass. The air smelled faintly of rain, the same scent that had followed her since that first night of terror. She walked toward it, her steps steady, her breathing calm. Somewhere behind her, the echoes of the courtroom faded, replaced by the soft rhythm of a hospital monitor in her memory, a sound that had once saved her. The noise of the city returned, blending with that remembered heartbeat, as she stepped into the light, ready for whatever waited next. Spring arrived quietly that year, soft and unhurried, as if the city itself had decided to breathe again. Months had passed since the verdict, and the noise of the trial had faded into something distant. The newspapers no longer carried her face on the front page. The talk shows had moved on, and for the first time in what felt like years, Emma Caldwell could walk down the street without hearing her name whispered in passing. She had traded the gleaming glass of the penthouse for a small apartment on the outskirts of San Francisco. The view from her window overlooked the bay, but instead of cold marble and mirrors, there were potted plants, soft curtains, and the gentle hum of ordinary life. Her days were slower now. She spent them preparing for the child that had survived everything. The nursery was simple, painted in pale yellow. A crib stood by the window, surrounded by sunlight. Sometimes, when she sat in the rocking chair and rested her hands on her stomach, she could feel the baby's kicks, gentle reminders of strength that had carried her through the darkest hours. The doctors called it a miracle. Emma called it survival. Noah visited often, always bringing quiet news. The FBI had finished its work. Ethan and Sabrina had been sentenced to long prison terms. Their frozen accounts had been divided, and part of the recovered assets had been transferred into a fund for victims of domestic and financial abuse. It's poetic, Noah said once, sipping his coffee. His greed is now paying for what he tried to destroy. Emma smiled faintly. That sounds like justice to me. He nodded. You know, you could do something with this. Turn it into something real. You've lived what others are still trying to escape. His words lingered long after he left. That night, she sat at her desk, a blank notebook open before her. She thought of all the women whose faces she had seen in waiting rooms, women who smiled through fear, who stayed because leaving seemed impossible. She thought of herself, the woman who once believed that silence meant safety. Then she wrote 3 words across the page: the Phoenix Foundation. The decision came as naturally as breathing. It wasn't about revenge or redemption. It was about rebuilding. The next morning, she called Noah. I want to help them, she said. The women who think they can't leave. The ones who think no one will believe them. I'll make some calls, Noah replied. You'll need permits, a lawyer. maybe a financial advisor, but I think it's a good start. The months that followed were full of quiet determination. Between doctor's appointments and restless nights, Emma filled out paperwork, met with nonprofit coordinators, and drafted the mission statement. The foundation's focus was simple: provide housing, legal aid, and emotional support for victims of abuse, especially those trapped by financial control. The irony was not lost on her. The same system that once nearly erased her name was now being rebuilt in her hands. When the day of her daughter's birth finally came, the sky was clear and bright. The hospital room smelled faintly of lavender and antiseptic. Nurses moved with calm precision around her bed. Noah was there, standing quietly in the corner, his presence steadying her. Hours blurred into minutes, then minutes into seconds. The pain came in waves, but beneath it all was something deeper, a fierce, unstoppable will. And then it happened. A cry, thin at first, then strong, filled the room. The nurse smiled as she lifted the baby, her voice soft. "It's a girl." Emma's tears came before the words did. She reached out, and the nurse placed the small bundle into her arms. The baby's skin was warm, her tiny fingers curling instinctively around Emma's thumb. "Lila Grace," Emma whispered. "Welcome home." The room felt lighter, almost sacred. For the first time in so long, the silence held no fear. It was peace. Later that afternoon, Noah returned with a bouquet of wildflowers. "She's perfect," he said, looking down at the sleeping baby. "She's the proof that life wins." Emma smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's everything he said I wouldn't have." "You gal." He handed her an envelope. "From the Bureau. Official closure on the case. And a note: your share of the seized assets has been released. You can use it however you want." Emma opened it but didn't look inside. "I already know what it's for." 2 weeks later, she stood in the courtyard of Street Helena Medical Center, the same hospital where she had once fought to stay alive. A small group of nurses and journalists gathered around a modest sign unveiled under the spring sunlight. The words were simple: The Phoenix Foundation, rebuilding lives, restoring hope. Emma spoke briefly. Her voice was calm, steady, almost serene. "This isn't about what I lost," she said. "It's about what survived. Pain doesn't disappear, but it can become something else, something that saves." Applause filled the courtyard, but Emma's gaze stayed fixed on the sky. Somewhere above the white hospital walls, she imagined a firebird rising, wings wide, breaking through clouds. That evening, when she returned home, the apartment glowed with the golden hue of sunset. Lila slept peacefully in her crib, her small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the world outside. Emma walked to the balcony, the air warm against her skin. The city below buzzed quietly, the bay reflecting the fading light. She looked back at her daughter, then out toward the horizon. "We made it," she whispered. The words were neither loud nor triumphant. They were gentle, certain, the sound of someone who had found her way back to herself. The night deepened, and lights began to flicker across the water. Emma stood there, listening to the soft coo of her child and the distant hum of the same city that had once been her prison and was now her home. Each breath felt like renewal. Each heartbeat felt like a promise. And as the last of the daylight faded, the soft laughter of her daughter drifted through the open door, mingling with the breeze, carrying with it the quiet strength of a woman who had survived everything and chosen to begin again. The morning sun rose over San Francisco with a calm brightness that touched every glass building and sparkled across the bay. Inside the convention center downtown, the lobby buzzed with quiet anticipation. Volunteers arranged rows of white chairs beneath banners that read "The Phoenix Foundation Annual Conference, Voices Reborn." Reporters checked their equipment, photographers adjusted their lights, and in the middle of it all, Emma Caldwell stood behind a curtain, breathing deeply before walking on stage. A full year had passed since the night she held her newborn daughter in her arms. In that time, her life had shifted from survival to purpose. The foundation she had created was no longer just an idea written in a notebook. It was alive. Offices had opened in 3 cities. Dozens of women had found shelter, legal protection, and jobs through its programs. Each success carried her name quietly, though she never claimed it. Emma no longer wanted to be remembered as the woman from the headlines. She wanted to be remembered as someone who turned pain into something useful, She adjusted the microphone clip to her blouse, smoothing the fabric of her light blue dress, the same color she had worn on the day everything began. She thought of that version of herself, the frightened woman kneeling on a marble floor, her life unraveling, and then she thought of the woman she was now. The difference felt like a lifetime. A staff member signaled from the side of the stage. The lights dimmed. The host introduced her name, and the applause began, soft at first, then stronger, like a tide building in rhythm. Emma stepped forward, her heels clicking against the wooden floor, the light widening around her. She paused for a breath and looked out at the audience. Rows of faces watched her. Survivors, activists, students, families, journalists. Among them sat Noah Bennett in the front row, hands folded, his expression calm and proud. Near him, a nurse cradled little Lila Grace, now walking and full of laughter, her curls bouncing as she clapped her tiny hands. "Good morning," Emma began, her voice steady and clear. "A year ago, I didn't know if I would ever speak in front of anyone again. I didn't know if I could stand without fear. But the truth has a way of bringing you back to your feet." She let the silence linger for a moment. "They tried to buy my silence with fear, but fear breaks. Truth doesn't." The room held its breath. Some nodded, others wiped tears. Cameras flashed, capturing the quiet fire in her eyes. She continued, "This foundation isn't about me. It's about every woman who was told she was crazy for asking for help. Every voice that was silenced because power spoke louder. Every life that was almost lost because someone said it wasn't worth saving. We're here to make sure those voices are never buried again." Applause swelled, filling the hall with sound. Emma smiled, waiting until it faded. "When I was at my lowest, I thought my story ended in fear. But then something happened that changed everything." She glanced at Lila, who now rested on the nurse's lap, staring back with wide eyes. "I became a mother, and with that, I understood what survival really means. It isn't about living through the pain, it's about creating something after it." Her speech lasted 15 minutes, but it felt timeless. Every word carried the weight of the past and the clarity of healing. When she finished, she thanked the audience and stepped back, the applause rising again, stronger than before. People stood, clapping until the sound filled every corner of the room. Emma bowed her head slightly, her heart calm. She didn't cry. She had already done all her crying in the years before. Now, there was only peace. After the event, the lobby filled with conversation and camera flashes. Reporters called out her name, but she answered only a few. "How does it feel to have inspired so many?" one asked. Emma smiled gently. "It feels like the world is finally listening." Another asked, "Do you think justice was truly served?" She thought for a moment, then replied, "Justice is never complete. It's something we have to keep choosing every day." As the crowd thinned, she walked toward the glass doors that opened onto the terrace. The afternoon light had shifted into gold. Outside, the bay shimmered, and in the distance, the Golden Gate Bridge stood against the horizon, solid and silent. Noah joined her, his jacket slung over one shoulder. "You did well," he said. "Thank you," she replied. "She would have been proud," he added, glancing at the nurse carrying Lila. Emma nodded. "We both would." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the light move across the water. Then she turned to him. "You're staying on the board? For as long as you'll have me," he said with a faint smile. "Then we have work to do," she said, returning his smile. He left soon after, heading down the steps to meet the waiting car. Emma stayed, leaning against the railing. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and spring. She could hear Lila's laughter behind her, bright and pure. The sound pulled her back inside the hall, where the little girl reached for her. Emma lifted her into her arms. Lila's small hands touched her face, and Emma kissed her forehead. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" The child giggled, resting her head against her mother's shoulder. A young journalist nearby called out, "Mrs. Caldwell, one last question. Do you ever think about him?" Emma paused, turning slightly toward the voice. The setting sun caught her hair, surrounding her in a soft glow. "Only when I remind myself how far we've come," she said. The reporter lowered the microphone, speechless. Emma walked away, holding her daughter close. The glass doors opened, and the last light of the day spilled across the floor. Outside, the sky burned orange and pink, the same colors that once signaled endings now glowing like beginnings. She stopped for a moment on the terrace, gazing out at the horizon. The wind brushed against her face, warm and gentle. Lila laughed again, and Emma's smile deepened. There was no fear in her anymore, no shadow left to follow her. Only the sound of her child's laughter, the pulse of life, and the steady rhythm of her own breathing. The city below shimmered as night approached, lights flickering on one by one. Emma whispered softly, almost to herself, "We rise." The words disappeared into the air, carried somewhere beyond the bridge, where the sky met the sea. And for the first time, she felt free in a way that no verdict, no apology, and no headline could ever define.